Good morning, everyone. In this beautiful rainy day from Davis, California, my name is Álvaro Escribabou, and I'm a research fellow with the Water Policy Center at the Public Policy Institute of California. I would like to welcome and thank you for joining us today. For today's program, I'm going to share the findings from a report we released in October titled Water Partnerships Between Cities and Farms in Southern California and the San Joaquin Valley. The report, the technical appendices, as well as the slides from today's presentation are all available on our website, ppic.org. After my presentation, we will transition to our panel discussion about the benefits of partnerships to build a more resilient water future for cities and farms in California. And finally, we'll conclude our event with questions from the audience, from you all. If you have a question for our panelists, please send an email to the address on the screen, ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. We would appreciate you including your name and organization along with your question. And with that, I will begin the presentation. Let me share my screen. I would like first to thank the funders, the SD Bechtel Junior Foundation, the Water Funder Initiative, and the consortium of San Joaquin Valley farmers for their support to this research and also for today's virtual event. And I would also like to acknowledge my co-authors, Koksha Shan, Ellen Hannock, and Bo Wilkinson for all the work in this report. Farms in the San Joaquin Valley and cities in Southern California face different but equally daunting water challenges. For the San Joaquin Valley, the requirement to achieve groundwater sustainability is expanding or increasing the interest in obtaining new supplies to reduce the need to follow irrigated farmland. For cities in Southern California, they have been dropping water demands in the past 2 decades, but climate change, which is bringing more intense drought, is complicating water planning. That's why we think that these two problems, the long-term groundwater sustainability problem in the San Joaquin Valley and the short-term drought management in the cities in Southern California, can be seen as complementary water problems. And because of that, moving from competition to cooperation could build resilience to these two regions. Cities and farms could take advantage of shared infrastructure, like the State Water Project that you are seeing in this photo, to address both regions' water challenges. In particular, specifically, we are talking about co-investments, investments between 2 or more partners in water infrastructure, and also water sharing agreements that would increase average supplies in the Central Valley, in the San Joaquin Valley, and boost Southern California supplies during droughts. But this idea of partnerships, it's not new to California. We have a long experience in some of these partnerships, and we would like to highlight some of these experiences. For example, we all know about groundwater banking in the southern San Joaquin Valley, which benefits the San Joaquin Valley, but also cities in the coast. There's also other examples like long-term transfers of dry year water from the Yuba River in the Sacramento Valley, which benefits the San Joaquin Valley and Southern California, but also provides some environmental benefits in the Delta. And there are also many different trading and storage partnerships in the Colorado River hydrologic region, both within regions, agencies, but also with partners beyond California. So we think that the water grid, which is the 2 elements that you see in these 2 maps, the network of storage and conveyance infrastructure, but also the groundwater basins, are the key element in promoting these partnerships, where you can do investments and move the water after that. And why are we bringing this point now? Because we think that there's a window of opportunity for partnerships between cities and farms. And this is because the 2 points that I explained briefly in the beginning, there's these 2 major shifts. First, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, SGMA, is increasing the interest in expanding supplies in the valley. because they need to achieve sustainability. For urban areas, the demand reductions and climate change makes droughts the major concern, and they need to plan for this. The Stay Water project, which brings drinking water to 2 out of 3 Californians, is the key or the major key infrastructure in this scheme of things. As you can see in the map, that the Stay Water project connects the Delta to the San Joaquin Valley and also all coastal regions, the Bay Area, the Central Coast, and Southern California. Exports or imports to the San Joaquin Valley and Southern California are a majority of them. And that's why we focused on these 2 regions. And Southern California is home to more than half of California's population. And we all know that it has a very sophisticated and diverse water portfolio. We assessed in detail the water portfolio options and costs, the evolution of demands, and the expected management challenges, because Southern California's willingness to participate in these partnerships is the key to success. In the map showing in the right, you can see the 3 hydrologic regions which compose Southern California: the South Coast, the South El Hontan, and the Colorado River hydrologic region. Most of the analysis that we did, we focused in the South Coast hydrologic region, which is a highly urbanized region. More than 80% of the supplies go to urban use. And they have more room to maneuver and to be key in this idea of partnerships. Just as an example of the analysis that we did, we want to show this graph because it shows how regional water demands and also demand projections have been falling over time. And this is key for this point that we made on reducing pressures on supplies on normal and wet years. What you see in the graph, in the orange line, you see the actual demands in the Metropolitan Water District Service area that have been actually falling since the early 2000s. And then in the dotted lines, you can see the projections in the integrated regional planning documents that Metropolitan did in different years. You can see that these projections have been revisited downwards. And we expect and we project for the future that this will be even revisited even more downward in the next round of planning documents, which is expected for this summer. Looking at or taking into consideration per capita water use in 2018, we projected estimates for the future. And as a result, we see that for 2040, we expect that the total water use in Southern California will be between 20 and 35% lower than what Metropolitan expected in 2016. And this is, again, a key element on this reduction on the pressure on supplies. But it's not only about demand. Southern California has been diversifying their supplies and reducing demands to manage droughts for many years now. We did this analysis and this presents just a summary of the main points. Supplies are increasingly diverse, and just going through them, we wanted to focus, for example, for imports in Southern California, which provide more than 50% of the water supplies right now. The focus is on safeguarding existing imports because there's an increasing vulnerability on all these imports that are facing. Water recycling, which is increasingly important, will be a major source. There's a lot of projects already planning to increase water recycling, and it will be a major source of water in the future. Stormwater capture is also on the rise, and there's also a lot of potential for this. But we wanted to highlight also that climate change could lower the potential, especially because more intense storms could challenge the way we capture this stormwater. Seawater desalination, because it's one of the most expensive water sources, will remain limited. Although this water provides supply benefits for some local regions that are really important. And finally, brackish desalination, has some expansion potential, especially in those places where we have groundwater basins with impaired groundwater sources. Trading and banking, which are already being used a lot in Southern California, will keep being an important source and will boost resilience. And water conservation, as we showed earlier, remain an essential management tool. So after that, what are these partnerships? What are the partnerships idea that we are explaining or trying to bring up? So we focus here in 4 types of partnerships. The first one is about co-investments. Co-investments means when 2 or more partners get an agreement or do an agreement to invest in a water investment, water supply or storage or conveyance. In this case, farmers in the Central Valley, in the San Joaquin Valley, could invest in alternative water supplies or conservation options in Southern California in exchange for this water. Also, Southern California agencies could expand investments in water storage or conveyance infrastructure in the valley. The second option, it's about unbalanced exchanges. Unbalanced exchanges are exchanges of water where farmers would get more water in normal and wet years in return for supplying or paying back some of this water during droughts. And this is how this could work, as an example. In normal and wet years, State Water Project deliveries, we would have more of these deliveries to the valley, more surface diversions, and more importantly, more recharge. So that would make less pumping, farmers would need to pump less water during these normal and wet years. In exchange, they would have less State Water Project deliveries in Southern California when they don't need it as much. Then during dry years, farmers would get less State Water Project deliveries, and they should have to pay back some of the deliveries that they get before from storage or from San Joaquin Valley contracts to Southern California. Then Southern California would get more State Water Project deliveries during these dry years. As a summary, because we have more normal and wet years than dry years, overall water supplies would increase in the San Joaquin Valley, and supplies during droughts would increase in Southern California. Then we would have this third option, which is mixed strategies. This option, we are combining just the 2 previous options, co-investments and unbalanced exchanges. And what we are bringing this up because we think that this is one of the most promising options. For example, in co-investments in urban water supplies, these urban water supplies are usually too expensive for farmers. So if we combine these co-investments with the unbalanced exchanges, farmers could get a price break for these urban supplies, but in exchange, they should get the water only in normal and wet years. And during droughts and dry years, this water would get to Southern California, to cities in the coast. Finally, the 4th strategy or the 4th partnership option, it's about opportunities related to future urban growth. Many urban agencies have invested in long-term supplies, water supplies or water contracts. For example, the State Water Projects, there are some agencies that have long-term State Water Project contracts that they are not using currently their full allotment. So because of this reason, there's a potential interest between cities and farms. Cities could engage with near-term transfers to ag. And this is happening in California. It's also happening in other states. But these partnerships face challenges, and we wanted to highlight them because it's important to know how to overcome them. First, it's about trading rules. About a lot of what we talked about is about the ability to move water around. So in the current rules, State Water Project, which we commented that is the key element or the key infrastructure connecting these regions, the ability to trade is limited, and also to exchange water, it's quite rigid. But we know that there are improvements underway. There's some amendments to the State Water Project contracts that are underway and could improve the flexibility. Place of use restrictions are also really important. Both the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project have more flexibility to trade water or to exchange water among the contractors, but it is quite difficult to move water beyond their service area. This is what is called the place of use. So adding some flexibility to this place of use, moving water beyond their service areas would be really beneficial. Also, there are obstacles with water availability and infrastructure. In this case, in the San Joaquin Valley, also in Southern California. For example, in 2017 and 19, we had really very wet years, but because of the limits on infrastructure, we couldn't recharge as much water as we wanted in the aquifers. So there's these limitations that has to be overcome. And also there are, during dry years, there's low ability to send extra water to Southern California from the San Joaquin Valley. This has to be considered too. Finally, there are other constraints. For example, farms and irrigation districts might have less financing capacity than others, and they might need some help on that. Or there's also high transaction costs, because we have seen that most of these partnerships, the current partnerships, are based or are engaged with larger agencies. But beyond challenges, or despite these challenges, we think that water partnerships hold a lot of promise, especially to try to confront the challenges of climate change. The main call that we did in this report is about local leadership, because we think that the local leaders, San Joaquin Valley Irrigation District farms and urban districts, or districts that have a lot of urban water use, need to engage in these partnerships, need to do the first movement. But the state could also help, for example, by assessing regional infrastructure. That's a really important point in the San Joaquin Valley, improving trading and recharge flexibility, as we mentioned before, and also by facilitating funding arrangements. These multi-benefit partnerships align with Governor Newsom's water resiliency portfolio. And although we have focused this research and this report in partnerships between the Southern California and the San Joaquin Valley, we think that other regions like the Central Coast and the Bay Area, and also other sectors like the environment, could benefit from these partnerships models that we are highlighting or bringing up. And with that, over with my presentation. I would like to remind you that if you want to submit your questions for the panel discussion, this is the address, ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. And I will stop and I will hand over to Bob Wilkinson, which will take care of the panel discussion. Thank you so much, and Bob, go ahead.
Thank you, Alvar. I'd like to start actually by thanking Alvar, Alan Hannock, and Gochi Sankan, who the co-authors of this report, and the PPIC staff, who not only helped with the project and pulling this together, but these presentations, they're doing a fabulous job and helping put this information out to the public. I think we have 450 or so folks on the presentation and discussion today. So it's my great pleasure to join three highly qualified experts today to discuss this topic of partnerships and opportunities. The panelists' bios are all on the PPIC website at the event page, so I won't waste time going through all of that. Please refer to those descriptions. So just briefly, Amy Catani is Vice President of Catani Farming and Ranching in Bakersfield, California, with broad experience on agricultural issues and water issues. Devin Apade is Assistant General Manager and Chief Operating Officer at the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, which we will likely refer to as MET, and that's the Metropolitan Water District. And Joe Yoon, Executive Officer of the California Water Commission, who is doing a lot of work with his staff and the board on the idea of resilience and ways the state can assist in making some of these opportunities possible. Amy, I'm going to start with you. And this project actually was initiated by a question coming from an ag player in the Valley who asked about the potential for cooperative opportunities. And I thought was a great question, as did PPIC. And so this project is really a response to that question coming from the Valley. Talk about how these kinds of water partnerships can help ag transition to groundwater sustainability.
So one of the main benefits for the ag sector is to really minimize the amount of land that needs to be taken out of production as a result of SGMA. As PPIC has studied in great detail, we're looking at upwards of 500,000 acres needing to come out of production in order to meet sustainability. So to the extent that we can increase the supply of water that's available to the ag sector, that will reduce the need to take some of that land out of production. And these partnerships promise to do that in two ways. One is to directly provide additional water that can be used by farmers. And Alvar described some of the different models for doing that. Water that's conserved in urban areas that can be used by agricultural partners, water that is banked in agricultural areas, some of which is left behind in wet years, and then supplied to urban areas in dry years. A second way that these partnerships could increase the water availability to the ag sector is by helping us to build infrastructure. So banking infrastructure, conveyance infrastructure is expensive and resources are limited in the ag sector. By partnering with urban agencies that will also be sharing in the use of that infrastructure, we can build a lot more of the infrastructure we need. And finally, just working in partnership to streamline some of the transfer process. As Alvar described, more flexibility in the system is better. And I think ag and urban can work together from a policy perspective to help get that done.
Very good. Devin, let me turn to you from an urban perspective. Met's been involved in a number of these water partnerships, in fact, urban to urban, urban to ag, for years, both in the Central Valley and further south. What are some of the benefits and the lessons learned from these opportunities, and what do you think these partnerships might bring to urban water suppliers in Southern California?
Thanks, Bob. And just to begin, I really want to thank PPIC for putting this forum on and developing the report. This has been great work and really enjoy engaging in the dialogue with you all today. As you'd mentioned, Bob, Metropolitan, we've got a pretty long history in developing partnerships along these lines that really hails back from the early 1990s. But I would share my perspective is the way it developed didn't really play out exactly the way we had kind of forecasted. When we were in the early 90s, we looked down the road many years. We were doing our planning process, and what we saw was that kind of 7 out of 10 years, Southern California would need more water than what we had available to us at the time. And Alvar talked a little bit about this, but where we are today, we've invested in really trying to help shore up our imported supplies. We've really focused on conservation and on helping to develop new local supplies. And with those dynamics, we're kind of now the opposite. We're kind of 3 out of 10 years where we might need additional supply, which means 7 out of 10 years we're capturing water. We've got some surplus that we're able to work with. And my observations are that these partnerships that we've developed that have helped us to get here are kind of different on the Colorado Basin side than they are, say, on the State Water Project side. And there's some lessons to be learned there. On the Colorado side, you have a relatively rigid priority structure that we all view as rigid, but one benefit of that is you very much know the pecking order. And because that system is a slow moving system, you also know pretty much what kind of supplies each of the parties will have each year. So we have been able to get partnerships with entities like the Palo Verde Irrigation District and Imperial Irrigation District as ag parties, Coachella Valley, which is a combination of urban and ag interests, and have really been able to execute what I would refer to as flexible arrangements. And Emmy kind of referred to this, that it isn't the same amount each and every year and the same price, but rather there's a framework that we've negotiated, and then you're able to fluctuate up and down as needs or as the market for products change. We're able to have those kinds of dialogues. On the State Water Project system, part of the challenge that we've had is that system is not like the Colorado where you've got relative certainty of what your supplies look like, a year ahead of time. It fluctuates greatly from year to year. You don't even know what water you're really going to be dealing with until a good portion of the way into the year. And both Emmy and Alvar described this, the structure with the contracts on the State Water Project side. It's just much more rigid. You've really got three mechanisms to be able to do deals with willing parties. One of them is just to sell your entitlement. It's just a long-term sale of your entitlement, and then you no longer have it and you've moved it to somebody else for a price. There was the opportunity to do single-year transfers through what's known as the turnback pool. And for listeners, to give you a sense, agencies might be investing hundreds of millions of dollars in their state water contract rights. And through the turnback pool in a single year, you're really getting pennies on the dollar in terms of if you exchange water to another party, what you get in return for that. So the activity through that pool has been very, very marginal. And finally, there's some structure for exchanges with payback obligations. Alvar showed a little bit of this opportunity on his graphics, and there has been some success there. Although the arrangements in terms of what you give and then what the payback obligation is are very not very well defined. And so there's opportunities there that could really, really blossom in future years, but we need better definition for what the flexibility of those exchanges look like. But that gives you a little bit of the lay of the land with respect to what we've been able to do. The one thing that I would add is on the state side, we've seen a lot more success in kind of storage arrangements. And the way those arrangements have worked is in the wet years, we're providing water, part of our state water project supplies to agricultural interests. And most often they're using the water for irrigating crops, and they're backing off their groundwater supplies. And then, in drier years, there's a return that comes back to us in return for that water that we allowed for storage. We've seen a lot of success there, and I think it's one example of the kinds of exchanges that we could see even more of going forward.
Good, thank you. Just really briefly, could you comment? It seems to me a lot of the transfers that we're talking about that you're involved in are in lieu transfers rather than physical water moving. There are arrangements set up so you can take advantage, but not necessarily be pumping water.
A combination. So I talked about on the put side, you're delivering the water. We dump the water off to somebody, they take it, and oftentimes they're irrigating with it. They're not using their groundwater. And then you're right, on the take side in a dry year, if we need some of that supply, it's a combination. Sometimes it's via exchange where people the negotiation has been that instead they would just let their state water project supplies go down the line to us and instead of them taking it. But in some cases, we're also seeing pump back where folks are actually pumping from the groundwater basin or from surface water storage into the state water project, and we're receiving that supply. So it's a combination of both, and it really depends on the capabilities of the parties in terms of what they're able to do.
Thank you. Joe, the California Water Commission has been really important in supporting and defining actually environmental benefits, public benefits from water partnerships, especially with the Prop 1 funding and all the work that you folks have been doing. What are some of the effective ways to bring the environment into these partnerships? What role might the state play in furthering these public benefits as part of these urban ag water partnerships?
Sure. So in 2014, when Proposition 1 was passed, the Water Commission was given the job of looking at that storage program, the $2.7 billion in Prop 1 for storage. And that was all tied to public benefit. And within the program, the statutes laid out ecosystem and flood protection, water quality, improvements, emergency response, and recreation as public benefits. So they were fairly good, defined in the law itself. And so we've been administering that program since that point. And so we understand a little bit about valuing public benefits and some of the discussion around public benefits. And then when the water portfolio was released, the governor's water portfolio in July 2020, the commission was asked to assess a state role in financing conveyance. And so we are in the process of that right now. And really having discussions around public benefits, what are the things that the state should be willing to pay for, or what might the commission recommend as a way for those agencies, when funding becomes available, to structure some kind of funding program. So I think in those conversations and in the conversations around water storage, when we talk about environment coming into these partnerships, certainly everybody talks about multi-benefit projects. To do multi-benefit projects, you need partners. And so when we talk about partnerships in this context, you're looking at a lot more players around the table, I think. And certainly there's many environmental NGOs out there, or environmental folks, landscape stewardship folks who are working on the ground around this place. But I think from the state's point of view, for us to really help with financing, we look at those public benefits. Ecosystem benefits are probably the category of benefits that is cleanest. A lot of people say when you look at a public benefit. So certainly I think getting the environmental piece into these partnerships has to do with how you build your coalitions or how you build your partners. I think that, as Devin was saying, it can be very project specific because the infrastructure involved and the partners involved, all of those pieces will kind of dictate what folks can do in terms of environmental benefit. And so I think having folks in that conversation early helps. I don't think ecosystem benefits can be something that you easily tack on when a funding program appears. I think it is something you really need to pay attention to. And I think, I think, so looking at those opportunities for, I don't know, what we call unconventional, partnerships, folks you didn't think about before, is important in this case. And I think also looking ahead a little bit, with climate change, we're not in the adaptation once and you're done kind of world. And so even if you don't see environmental benefits playing big in your partnerships now and in the projects that you're contemplating, I think it's important to have those folks around the table, because later on, as Emmy was saying, one of the benefits to the ag community is keeping more land in production. But at some point, you'll be making decisions in terms of what is the best use of a piece of land if it's going to come out of production. And so, is it recharge? Is there environmental benefits to be gained there? Is it some kind of watershed function? And so ecological restoration is important on that piece of land. So I think having the right folks around in the conversation, even in the long term, is a benefit to having the incorporating environment in these partnerships. And then I think lastly, Bob, I think you got to think about how you could use natural infrastructure. A lot of times when we in the conveyance discussions, everybody's mind runs to man-made conveyance, right? Pipelines, canals. But if you're looking and thinking about climate change, and you're thinking about trying to do something that is lower intensive in energy to move water, and looking to gain environmental benefit, what can those natural infrastructure pieces do for you? And it's again highly project specific, because you may not have them in the places that you're working, or you really need to kind of think about how that might work. So I think those are probably some of the big pieces. I think with environmental benefits, the other big thing, and I don't want to be too negative because I think we're really talking about what's possible here, but when you're looking at environmental benefits, you're trying to achieve some kind of net benefit for the environment. Certainly when we talk sometimes about large scale projects or infrastructure projects, there are impacts. And so it's that trying to find that balance and trying to come up with an environmental benefit that it really is an added benefit, that is not mitigation, is not overall detrimental to the environment. So it is a balance game with environmental benefits.
Let me tell you one more step, Joe, because this is really important work. You and your staff are leading this effort to analyze regional conveyance needs as well as statewide. And as you say, there are differences region to region, significant differences. What are some of the insights you're gaining from that effort to help take this whole thing to the next level?
Sure, I can share a little bit. I mean, right now, the commission has just wrapped up the 4 workshops around the state, different regions of the state, really just getting some input from folks all over California about the priorities they may have in different regions and what the state should look at in terms of public benefits. We're just getting information in, but I'll share a little bit, and I'll make a clarification. I mean, in the water portfolio, there isn't a companion piece, or at least I like to think of it as a companion piece or companion action that actually belongs to DWR, not the Water Commission, which is looking at the feasibility of expanding infrastructure, local, federal, state infrastructure, and how that might help in water trading. So that piece, I think, is a companion piece. So the commission isn't necessarily assessing everybody's infrastructure or conveyance at this point. We're looking at the role the state can play in financing. But within that, I think one of the things that we're coming across is when you think of the state as a funding agency, a funding partner, I think we have to be aware, and what's becoming obvious as we go around the state is one size does not fit all. Right. And these partnerships, the ability or the opportunity for partnerships can change with the different places that you visit in the state, different people's experiences. Just looking at trust factors that people have in different regions of the state, it's very different. You know, speaking to some folks in the Colorado River region, you know, if you say conveyance, they automatically think export from their region. And when you're looking at some parts of the state, that does not have a wonderful history to it. So there's a lot of sensitivity out there to these partnerships. I think then that makes me think about, as you look forward to what's the state role? Does the state role do we have a place, or do we have a role in trying to incentivize partnerships beyond just paying for public benefit? Are there things that we should be doing to help folks with and I defer to the other panelists here, but to the large amount of work and effort that it takes to even forge partnerships and have the discussions we need to have to make something that's a functional partnership. You know, when you get a lot of players around the table, things take time. And one thing, when we look at climate change, you don't have a lot of time anymore in trying to figure out these complex schemes that we're talking about. So there's a lot of moving parts. So trust is different around the state. Also, the conveyance needs are different around the state. And some folks, it's interesting because what we find is in some of the conversations we had, and specifically I'm thinking about I think it was a Northern California conversation we had, folks don't even realize that other people in different parts of the state have very different concerns with climate change and conveyance. You know, somebody said something about wildfire concerns or something like that, and somebody else chimed in and said, well, what does that have to do with conveyance? And well, if you're up in the headwaters somewhere and your supply is wood flume and and it runs through the forest, and wildfires are a huge concern for somebody. So, you know, so I think a lot of the human pieces are coming to light as we go around the state, and how we use funding from the state to help folks either address, you know, human right to water needs or our ecosystem benefits, recreation benefits, any of those public benefits that we talk about, and trying to, it might be that the state has to play several different roles, right? One program might not fit everybody. So that's some of the insights that we have, but we'll get more into it. I mean, I'm sure invite all your viewers to the February commission meeting where we'll do a roundup of some of the things that are coming out of those workshops and some of the input we're getting, which might be pretty interesting.
That'd be great. Thank you. Emmy, let me come back to you. It seems to me, having gone through this study, we met with folks from different communities around the state. As Alvar said, it looks like the opportunities are not strictly Valley, Southern California. There are opportunities, as Joe just said, in different parts of the state in different ways. What do you see as key next steps for the urban ag component of these partnerships, trying to figure out how to make some of the changes in both sectors that could lead to partnerships that would improve efficiency, provide supply, restore groundwater levels, the kind of win-win-win options we're all interested in?
I think we definitely need to see some leadership from the irrigation district managers and GSAs to kind of push this forward. And, you know, I think one key thing we need to do in the ag sector, what we really bring to the table that makes ag needs and demand for water complementary to urban is flexibility. And so there are two ways that the ag sector can make its demand more flexible and really enable a lot of these partnerships. One is the ability to flex between groundwater and surface water. And with Sigma, we have to do that in a sustainable way, which really means recharging more water when it's available. So we need to expand both dedicated recharge, and I think we need to get more creative in looking at on-farm recharge. And are there, you know, what are the incentive structures in irrigation districts that make it worthwhile for growers to recharge when there's water available? And then, of course, the conveyance to get the water to where we can recharge it. The second way that the ag sector can be flexible is in flexing between years when there's not water available and cities need that water, and following some land on a rotational basis, and then farming other years when there is water available. And to do that, we really need to make sure that a significant portion of land stays in annual crops rather than permanent crops. And you know, there's been a trend over the last couple of decades toward planting out permanent crops. Permanent crops are, as a general rule, more economical in a lot of areas, and yet they're not flexible. So I think we also should be looking at what are the incentive structures, whether at the irrigation district level or the GSA level, or possibly even as a part of the partnership structure with urban partners, to give farmers an incentive to keep some land in annual crops. And then the other side of that coin is as urban partners make decisions as to whether to call water and use it in a certain year or to send that water to ag partners, would be to make those calls as early as possible. So the later you make that decision, the more a farmer has invested in seeds and in you know, contracting to sell the crop and you know, working the land. So if we can avoid some of those costs by making decisions early in the ag cycle, the ag calendar, then that makes it work better for everybody. Great.
In a moment, we're going to shift to questions, and a few are coming in, and I'm going to probably start with you on one of the first ones just popped in as a good one. But to wrap this session up, I think we got about another minute or two. Devin, maybe from your perspective briefly on actions that are needed to scale up these partnerships. You've mentioned some of them already, but if you have any further thoughts on what, from your perspective, we might do to crank this up a bit.
Thanks, Bob. I would say number one is something that we're working on right now, and that's fundamental changes to the way that the state water contract allows management of water. And the reason I say that is Emmy and I can sit down and we can hammer out an arrangement that works, that could be something that we're giving water and receiving water at different times, and yet if the state water contract doesn't allow it, it inhibits that activity, and that's the way it is right now. There is an amendment that is being considered by agencies. I think as of today, 24 of the state water contractors have approved it. And we'll be considering it at our board next week, and that would be an amendment that allows a little more free dialogue among the contractors and the ability to execute exchanges and transfers. The other one is just actually what this report has created, and that's the opportunity to find a tent for all of us to get under and have these discussions. There have been some eye-opening events. I think that on the one hand, when we in 2014 and 15, as an agency, chose not to participate in the transfer market, that was eye-opening for a lot of people, because folks thought, oh, Met would be one of the entities that's out there buying a bunch of dry year water. And yet, because of our storage investments, we were able to rely on those and really let other folks focus on the dry year transfer market. So that was eye-opening in one way. One thing that was eye-opening for us was recent discussions with our board about potentially investing in a major recycled water facility here down in our service area. And as we were going through that board process, I received contacts from a number of folks saying, well, if you're going to do a project of that size and scale, could we invest in it with you and then get some of the water supply further upstream as a trade? And the reason why it was eye-opening for me is because the price point for that project is higher, but people were still willing and desirous of having that conversation. So that's why I say, if you have the tent that we can all get under to have these conversations, it doesn't mean that there is a specific outcome, but I believe that outcomes will develop. We'll find common ground, and then we might be able to hammer out some deals.
That's a great way to wrap this first session. I very much agree with that. We're going to bring Alvar back in to help field questions from all of you. We've got just under 15 minutes left for an open discussion here. So just a reminder, PPIC event questions at gmail.com is the place to send in questions. And Lori is fielding them and feeding them to me. And let me start with the first one from Mark Borba, Borba Farms in the San Joaquin Valley. Can the panel address opportunities that can be made available through adaptive management of the environmental demands and restrictions on transport exports from the Delta? And there's a second part to this. How can we use existing infrastructure, state and federal, for better adaptive management of the water resources in the Delta, with the objective being to increase use water resource, I think that's water use resource, to better manage needs for environmental, ag, and urban users. Emmy, let me ask you to give you a first bite at that apple.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of work around management of the Delta that needs to be undertaken both at the state and the federal level. I think one thing that would be very helpful would be greater coordination between the state and federal officials on management of the Delta. I think the flexibility I referred to earlier is an important component for the ag sector to really adjust between years when there is a lot of water coming through the Delta being made available to contractors and years when there's less water available. I think storage also plays a role where during periods when we can get water through the Delta, and often some of the best times to bring water through the Delta are not aligned with the irrigation needs of agriculture. So if we can move the water when that's possible, and then store the water until it's needed for irrigation, I think that benefits everybody, but that obviously takes the storage and conveyance infrastructure to make that happen.
Good. Here's another one that maybe I'll also let you jump in on. Then I've got one for Alvar coming in. This one's from Norman Johns. There seems to be an inherent assumption that the envisioned wet year enhanced recharge can be utilized on farm. Can that water actually be put to easy use? Would the excess water interfere with farming practices they are today, or perhaps with current crop patterns? If so, that seems to be an impediment to adoption.
That really depends on both what crop you're growing and when the water comes. And there's been some great work by Sustainable Conservation on this topic, which is a California-based NGO, looking at crop by crop. So during the dormant period in the winter, quite a few crops can take water for on-farm recharge. Grapes for sure, almonds in the right soils. Obviously, if you're growing annual crops, you know, a lot of times there's not a crop on the land in the winter. If you're looking at other periods, that becomes more difficult, or if you've got a winter crop on the ground, that's more difficult. You also want sandy soils to do that. And that's where I think I referenced incentive structures before, but I think that becomes really important for people to have incentives to keep certain ground that has high potential for recharge available for when that water is available to recharge.
Great, thank you. Alvar, this one I think is for you, from Henry Gromlich from Callegas Municipal Water District. Since the publication of the paper, you've had a chance to discuss your findings with a variety of stakeholders. What did you learn that might be useful for us?
I think that, you know, I think taking on what Devin said in his last intervention, I think that there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of new interest, and that, but also challenges to overcome. And one of the things that we wanted to highlight here is this idea that you don't need to do the investments, or by making the investments with partners, you can actually get to cheaper options, because you can make the investment in the place where it's cheaper or more affordable, and then you can move the water around. And that, the idea of partnerships. And the second thing that to me is quite innovative in this is that, and this is, you know, quite likely because of Sigma, that farmers are kind of taking the step further in this, you know, taking the initiative. Usually the point on this partnership has been urban, or, you know, cities taking the initiative to partner with farms or with the agricultural sector to kind of get, you know, these kind of arrangements. But now farms, especially in the Central Valley, are really interested in expanding their potential options for supplies. And this is an option that could be, and this is one of the things that we have learned from this report and from all the outreach that we have done. Yeah,
I'm going to take the moderator's liberty and just chip in, having listened to a lot of these sessions as well since we put this out. And I think it really builds on what Devin said. The appetite and interest in having conversations around new arrangements, new possibilities is stronger than I had thought, which is a very hopeful sign. So I think continuing this in some way would really be helpful. Let's see, Gary Pitzer from the Water Education Foundation asks, did the folks at Met's service area achieve the 20% reduction in per capita use by 2020 that was called for in the 2009 law? And perhaps you might even want to comment more broadly, because I think it's been about 20 years of steady and significant progress on improvement in water use efficiency in your service area.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. In fact, we did. 2019 was actually the lowest per capita water use in our region in our records. And so when people think about the drought of 2014, 15, 16, and then things got wet and it eased up, what we've seen is water use has actually continued to stay low, and in fact, even declined a little bit further. So we're continuing to see those gains, and we were a big supporter of the water efficiency legislative package just a couple of years ago to try to continue to see moderation in water use in our service area. So we see that as a big contributor to why we've been able to capture water and be able to store that water and be prepared for, frankly, years like last year. To give you an example, last year we had a 20% state water project allocation. So it was tied for the second lowest allocation that we've seen. And yet we actually were able to see a slight increase in our storage reserves, even with that low state water project allocation. So that a lot of good water management, but also a lot of focus on being efficient with the water use. And Bob, the one other thing that I would just react to in the discussion today is the question earlier about adaptive management. I think that the time where we all feel like we can have a plan and submit that plan and rest on it for 10 years, or create a regulatory structure and rest on it for 10 years, it's gone. Things are changing so fast, and we have to acknowledge that the structures we put in place have to be adaptive. And an example, I think the question was focused on supplies from the Delta. The nature of storms, it's not the way that it was 20, 25 years ago when we had the original Bay Delta plan, the water quality control plan. And so we've got to acknowledge that change and have an adaptive structure that recognizes that things aren't going to be the same from year to year.
Good. This next question, actually, I'd like, Joe, if you could take the first cut at it, but maybe all of you wouldn't comment. It's from Jay Ziegler. Don't we need better systematic water accounting to demonstrate net benefit to the environment as a defining criteria for public investments? How do we go about that with different data needs across the system? So why don't you start with that, but I'm sure others may have some comments on that one as well.
But that's a huge question, isn't it? So, I think with environmental benefits and ecosystem benefits, I think that is a huge question of how much flood flows can we take, for example, if we're talking about the big flashy hydrology that we're looking at with climate change. How much can you take, and how do you understand that in terms of environmental value and what it would be doing if you didn't take it? And I think so. I think I would agree with Jay that we do need more information in this area to really kind of understand what's happening. I'm not sure. I mean, that's one of the places where I think there's probably a place for the state to at least step in and say we need some way for everybody to look at it similarly. Certainly, I'm not sure how that manifests and where that lies, but it seems like that's the kind of role of data that the state can play with open data sources and things like that. I'll leave it there and allow room for other folks to chime in.
We've got just a couple minutes left, but I would like to offer the rest of you a chance to weigh in on that one. It's a pretty good place for us to wrap anyway.
Yeah, I'll just weigh in briefly. I think data and measurement are critical to making all aspects of this work. I agree with you, Jay, on the environmental side. Also on the ag side, I spoke earlier about incentives. Incentives only work if we can actually measure how much water is being used, how much water is being banked. And so, yeah, that's definitely an area that we need to build on.
I would totally agree with Emmy's comments, and Jay's question is a good one. I think that the Dodd bill just a few years ago was really focused on trying to increase the transparency with respect to water data related to transactions. I know the California Water Data Consortium is really focused in this area along with the state, and there are gains to be made. The more that we know about the water that's moving, whether it's for urban or ag use or the environment, the better decisions we're going to make.
Alvar, you got a closing shot on this one?
Sorry, yeah, I wasn't muted. So yeah, I will add on this and just not talking about the environment, talking about the ag on groundwater sustainability, that one of the assumptions of the project is that water accounting and groundwater accounting and it's kind of being done well. So that's a big challenge, and we know that. And it's really important for basins to try to start thinking, and they are already doing, start thinking about sigma and balance and putting recharge as much as you can with wet years and trying to be consistent with this groundwater sustainability for the long term. So that was what I was about.
Thank you. I'd love to keep going for another hour or two of this, but I think we've run out of our time. So thank you all so much for sharing your time with us today and thoughts. Thanks to all the participants, the cast of hundreds. It's quite gratifying that and these topics. Thank you to the PPIC funders and staff and supporters. I'm personally very grateful that PPIC is there and doing this work. It's really important. We hope that'll continue. If you've pre-registered for this event, later today you'll get a survey. Please fill it out. That's important to PPIC to fine-tune these programs. Be safe and have a good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.